If you like these videos, please check out my full course at www.lsat.totaltestprep.net with tons of clearly explained actual LSAT questions written by someone who's mastered test and helped others master it, and an evaluation period where you only pay if you want to continue.
Okay, so in this video, we're going to go over the rules fundamentals. So, how do you best understand and approach the rules? Well, rules are constraints that limit the number of arrangements. How do we deal with the rules? And what are the common variations? Okay, so in terms of basic information, the rules establish the relationships between the elements. And they basically come in three variations. And this is true for all game types. So rules can relate movable elements to one another. It's usually two elements to one another, but sometimes more than two. So you'll have movable elements just mentioned in the rules and how they can and cannot interact. The rules can relate the movable elements to the structure, and usually just one, but sometimes more, meaning you'll have a single movable element or multiple movable elements, and whether they can or cannot go into one particular slot, although sometimes there'll be more than one slot. And the rules may relate structural elements to one another. So this usually happens in the grouping games, which tells you that different groups can't have the same element or something along those lines. And this is what I said, where they were most common in grouping games, where it might say, for example, that two groups can't have the same element. Now, more complex rules, you will have more complex rules. The more complex rules will deal with more relationships. So there's basic variations, but you also then have maybe more complex or more specific variations depending on the game. Now, with respect to the symbolization, so you need to be able to quickly and easily reference the rules. To do the questions, you need to be able to check the rules. You need to make sure that your placement of movable elements isn't breaking any of the rules. So when you're doing the question, you're doing a potential diagram to test an answer choice, you're making a diagram, and you need to make sure that what you're putting in there isn't breaking any of the rules. That's why you need to be able to quickly and easily reference the rules. Now, the rules aren't written clearly, and it's kind of time consuming to reread a rule every single time. So you need to use symbols to represent the rules. That's the basic point. That's how you're able to do it quickly and easily. You take the rule and you symbolize it into something that you'll immediately see what it's talking about. So the basic point is just to use symbols and representations that make sense. And the key thing is to try and understand or visualize the rule in terms of the diagram. Every time you read it, ask yourself, what does this mean in terms of the diagram that I'm drawing? So not, how many runners, which runner is in which place, but which letter goes in which slot, for example. And what you want to do is you want to use then symbols that clearly represent those relationships. So be consistent in that use of symbols. And if a rule can't be translated using symbols, you can also it's perfectly fine just to abbreviate it. So this once again comes back to you need to be able to do this quickly and easily. So you want to use symbols and representations. You can try and understand that by thinking of the rule in terms of what's going on in the diagram. There's going to be some set symbolizations. You want to be consistent in how you use it so that you're not thinking to yourself, why am I doing this in a particular way in this game, and is it different from another one? How exactly am I using the symbol? So whenever you use the symbol, always use it in the same sense. And whenever you can't use a symbol, you can always abbreviate just so that you more quickly and easily, as you're scanning through it, understand what the rule is telling you. So there's going to be some frequent rules. So let's look at the linear game. So we've got our game up here. It says runner is A, B, C, D, and E. Win places 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a race. Not necessarily in that order. So this is a basic sequential game. Now we can use a dash or a line to show that an element goes before or after another element. So if we have a rule that says B finishes before A, you see how we drew it down there with B dash A. The dash sort of in the middle of the letters. So it's not at the bottom, it's not at the top, in the middle of the letters, just lets you know that that's the relative position. So it's not indicating distance, it's just telling you that B is before A and that A is after B. We don't really know how far away they are. I mean, B could be first, A could be last, or B and A could be first and second, or fourth and fifth, or any other ones, as long as we know that B is before A. So that's when you use the dash, you're just saying, look, this comes before the first one comes before the second one whenever I have the diagram. Now you can also add additional letters and dashes for more complex relationships between multiple elements. So for example, we have a rule here that says that D finishes before C and E. A good way of drawing that is like we have here on the bottom. Excuse me. So D and then 1 dash up to C and then 1 dash down to E. So this is the same exact thing. We know that D is before C and E, but now we have multiple letters involved. And if you have multiple elements but don't know the relationship between some of them, in this case C and E, we don't know if C is before E, C is after E. You can place them one on top of another. And this is how I would want you to draw a situation that is like this, where you're told that D is before C and it's before E. So you've got 2 dashes going from D to C and E. But instead of having, say for example, D and then 1 dash and then C and E, you can also do that, but a slightly better way of doing it, I think, is to do it like this, with 2 dashes and C and E on top of one another, because then you can tell yourself, wait, I don't know where C and E are, and if you have other rules that connect to C, for example, or that connect to E, it's easier to simply add it onto what you have, as opposed to having written out C and E, or C, C, E together, or something like that. So C on top of E in this situation is a good idea. So this is a situation where you have an element that goes before or after another element. Now, if you know the distance, you can use underscores to show the distance between elements. So in this case, in these two rules, we don't know the distance. But if we look at this rule, it says there's one runner between A and C. And we can draw that like this, where we have A with an underscore under A, an underscore for a blank spot, which is the one runner between A and C, and then a C with an underscore. Now, the the underscore represents space, and the number of underscores is the number of spaces between elements. So this is just a good way of showing that you have distance built into this rule. Since you know that there's one runner between A and C, it's going to be a block of 3, and instead of simply drawing a dash or something along those lines, if you have an underscore in between them and then an underscore underneath the letters as well to make it a little bit more consistent, you'll be able to see, oh, there's distance involved. But if the order of elements is unknown, you can use a curved double arrow to show that they're interchangeable. And that's what we have here. We're told that there's a runner between A and C, but we don't know which is first. We don't know if it's A and then a letter and then C, or rather A then a runner then C, or if it's C then a runner then A. So in order to represent that, instead of simply drawing A underscore C or A underscore C underscore, you can draw a curved double-headed arrow or double arrow in between them to show that they are interchangeable. So the curved double arrow, as opposed to the straight double arrow, which is conditional, but the curved double arrow is for interchangeability. So that's what we have here. Now, if the elements are adjacent, you can simply place them on 2 adjacent underscores. And that's why I want you to use the underscores, because they let you know that this is that you're dealing with slots, you're dealing with spaces. So for example, if you have a rule that says excuse me, B and D are adjacent to one another, you can draw that like this, where you have B and D draw right next to another with 2 underscores, and once again we've got the curved double arrow because we're told that they're adjacent, but we don't know which one is first. So this is how I would like you to symbolize those rules that do involve distance. So the top 2 rules, B finishes before A, D finishes before C and E, don't involve distance. They're just relative position, and you can just draw dashes there. The ones underneath, there's one runner between A and C, and B and D are adjacent. They do involve distance, and you reflect the distance, or you represent distance using underscores in between them, or underscores for the letters themselves to show that they're going in a particular slot. And in this case, since we actually don't know their sequence, we would use the double arrow to show that their positions are interchangeable in those situations. Okay, excuse me. And you can also place movable elements directly into the diagram if possible. If you have, there's these kinds of frequent rules in these games as well. So for example, we have the rule B finishes first. Well, you just put B in the first spot, and then you know that every diagram that you make, it's going to have to start off with B there, because that's what you're told. So if an element is restricted to a specific spot, just place it in the diagram. It's the easiest way of working with it. Now, if it cannot go in a specific spot, you can place it above or underneath, depending on what you feel more comfortable with and how much space you have, and you can simply cross it out. So a rule like A doesn't finish 5th, just put it underneath the 5. You put an A underneath the 5 down there, underneath the column, and you can cross that out. If I had drawn it differently, if we had space, we could have put the A above the 5, and you could have crossed it out there as well. So this is a situation where you have certain rules that interact with the structural elements, and it makes sense to put them into your template diagram to let you know that that's what it's going to look like when you're making that diagram, when you're making the test diagram, either putting it directly into the spot, or you can show that it cannot go into a particular spot.